Mina had always considered herself someone who understood people well. As the owner of a small boutique located in the heart of a busy market, she had spent years reading expressions, tones, hidden emotions, yet nothing prepared her for the strange shift that began the night Laura arrived at her door. It was a quiet Thursday evening, the kind Mina treasured after long days of managing customers, suppliers, and endless bookkeeping. Omar was in the living room rehearsing for a presentation he'd been anxious about for weeks. They were finally settling into a slow, peaceful night when the doorbell rang. Mina assumed it was a neighbor or a delivery she had forgotten about. But when she opened the door, Lara stood there tall, poised, effortlessly confident. Lara was one of Omar's co-workers, someone Mina had met only briefly during office gatherings. She was the type of woman people noticed instantly, polished without trying, charming without appearing fake, and always speaking with the kind of boldness Mina admired but never practiced herself. "Sorry for coming unannounced," Lara said with a bright smile. "Omar left these documents at the office. They're important for his meeting tomorrow." Omar, who rarely forgot anything work-related, appeared from the living room looking surprised but also strangely relieved. "Lara, I didn't even realize I left those behind." What was supposed to be a 2-minute drop-off somehow turned into a casual conversation in the entryway, then into tea at the dining table. Mina watched this unfold with polite confusion. Lara was animated, telling stories about office mishaps, imitating coworkers, making both Mina and Omar laugh. She fit into the house's atmosphere too easily, as though she'd been there many times before. And yet, beneath the laughter, something subtle was happening, something Mina didn't fully understand then. Lara kept directing the conversation toward Omar's presentation, his nerves, his posture, the pressure he felt from management. She spoke gently but confidently, complimenting his work ethic, his intelligence, even his voice. Omar, who usually downplayed himself, responded to her warmth in a way Mina hadn't seen before. Every time Mina tried to shift the topic, Lara effortlessly looped it back to Omar's potential, his stress, his importance at work. It wasn't flirtation, not exactly. It was attention, focused and intentional, the kind that made someone feel significant. Omar absorbed every word. Still, Mina didn't feel threatened. If anything, she felt oddly grateful. Omar had been withdrawn lately, burdened by responsibilities he rarely verbalized. But here he was smiling, engaged, sitting taller as Lara spoke. It was as though her presence breathed temporary confidence into him, but the strange part was how natural it all seemed. When Mina went to refill the tea, she heard Omar laugh, genuinely laugh at something Lara whispered. It was a small sound, but it echoed uncomfortably in her chest. Lara eventually left, apologizing again for staying too long. Yet when the door closed, Mina couldn't shake the unsettled feeling that something had shifted in her home that night, something subtle, invisible, yet unmistakably real. It was the beginning of a change she hadn't asked for, and wasn't prepared to understand. The days following Lara's unexpected visit brought a strange energy into Mina and Omar's home. At first, Mina thought it was just her imagination, an overreaction fueled by unfamiliar emotions. But soon, she noticed subtle changes in Omar's behavior. He seemed lighter, more engaged, and even spoke about work with a spark she hadn't seen in months. The shift was noticeable, but Mina didn't yet understand the source until Lara appeared again. This time with an offer that would make everything more complicated. Lara called one afternoon, saying she wanted to help Omar prepare for his high-stakes presentation. She claimed she had strategies that could enhance his delivery, how to project confidence, maintain presence, and captivate the audience. Omar, nervous and perfectionistic by nature, immediately accepted. Mina, intrigued but cautious, decided to stay during the session, thinking she could offer support and also monitor the situation. After all, it was professional coaching, or so it seemed. When Lara arrived, she carried a small notebook, but also an air of authority and calmness that instantly commanded the room. She greeted Mina warmly, her smile easy and natural, and then turned her full attention to Omar. The coaching began with basic advice: adjusting posture, opening gestures, speaking clearly. Mina watched silently, convinced that her presence would keep the interaction strictly professional. Yet, as the minutes passed, she felt a quiet tension rising, a mix of curiosity, confusion, and unease. Lara's methods were unusual. She demonstrated techniques by guiding Omar, physically adjusting his shoulders, placing her hands briefly over his to show the right motion, leaning in slightly to illustrate breathing patterns. Every touch was framed as part of the instruction, yet each contact lingered longer than expected. Mina felt a pang in her chest watching the way Omar responded. His usual stiff nervousness melted under Lara's guidance. His eyes brightened, his posture straightened, and a subtle, unexpected smile appeared on his face, a smile Mina hadn't seen for months, maybe years. It wasn't just about the presentation. Lara's approach involved emotional engagement too. She encouraged Omar to connect with the audience, to speak from his experiences, to feel confident in his own worth. Mina realized that while Lara was teaching professional skills, she was also offering something Omar had been craving in their marriage: undivided attention, validation, and emotional closeness. Lara's methods made him feel seen, capable, and alive, things Mina hadn't managed to do recently despite her best intentions. By the end of the session, Omar was glowing with a newfound confidence, praising Lara for her guidance. He thanked her warmly, almost intimately. Mina applauded too, but beneath her polite smile, unease stirred. She couldn't ignore the unusual closeness, the subtle intimacy of the coaching. The line between professional help and personal connection had begun to blur. What Mina thought was a harmless mentorship now carried a weight she wasn't ready to confront, a tension that hinted at emotional entanglement, the kind that could upend trust and reshape relationships. That night, Mina lay awake, replaying every gesture, every smile, every whispered instruction. She understood one undeniable truth. Something in her marriage had shifted, and Lara had become an unexpected catalyst. But what exactly that meant, Mina didn't yet know. In the days that followed Lara's coaching sessions, Mina couldn't shake the uneasy feeling growing in her chest. At first, she tried to dismiss it, telling herself that Omar simply needed support for an important presentation. But the subtle changes in him, his energy, his attention, his newfound confidence, were impossible to ignore. Something was different, and Mina, usually perceptive, felt a creeping doubt take root. She began to watch him more closely, noticing details she had previously overlooked. Omar's behavior shifted gradually but noticeably. He started leaving earlier for work, citing extra preparation, and he lingered longer at the office without giving clear reasons. He wore a new cologne, subtle but noticeable, and even adopted a slightly sharper style of dress that hadn't been part of his routine before. He laughed more freely, his posture improved, and he spoke with a certain warmth and openness that Mina hadn't seen in years. At first, she tried to take pride in his improvement, telling herself it was good for him to feel more confident. Yet, deep inside, annoying doubt persisted. The real seed of suspicion was planted during one evening when Mina noticed Omar texting late into the night. The messages were brief, casual, yet frequent, always from someone saved under a first name she didn't immediately recognize. When Mina asked casually who it was, Omar shrugged and said it was a friend giving last-minute advice about his presentation. But his tone lacked the usual openness he had with her. Instead, it carried a quiet defensiveness that made her heart race with worry. She couldn't explain why, But the small inconsistencies made her uneasy. Even more alarming was the way Omar talked about Lara. At first, he described her as helpful, professional, and supportive, nothing more. But Mina noticed the lingering warmth in his voice when he mentioned her name, the way his eyes softened, almost unconsciously. He recalled her advice in conversations, often repeating her words with a hint of admiration. The combination of physical coaching, emotional encouragement, and their shared laughter began to feel too intimate. It wasn't just a professional mentorship, it was becoming personal. And Mina couldn't tell how far that personal connection had reached. Mina's mind raced with worst-case scenarios, each more unsettling than the last. She found herself imagining emotional betrayals, feeling a mixture of fear, jealousy, and helplessness. Yet part of her also questioned whether she had truly been failing Omar all this time. He had always seemed distant, absorbed in his work, quietly carrying burdens without sharing them. Had she overlooked his needs? Had she unintentionally created space for someone like Lara to step in? By the end of the week, the tension in the household was palpable, though unspoken. Mina's attempts to mask her anxiety only made her more aware of Omar's subtle changes. Each interaction, each glance, felt loaded with questions that neither of them voiced. Suspicion had settled like a shadow over their home, growing quietly but insistently. Mina knew something significant had shifted in their marriage, but she had no way to confront it without risking conf. The unease that had been quietly simmering in Mina's mind over the past week reached a breaking point one late evening. Omar had told her he would be working on his presentation at home, and Mina, tired from the boutique, had settled into the living room with a book, trying to occupy her mind. The house was unusually quiet, with only the soft hum of the air conditioner filling the space. It was then that Mina realized she had left a folder she needed for her, Business and Omar's Study. As she stepped quietly down the hallway, she noticed the study door slightly ajar, and a soft murmur of voices reached her ears. Curiosity, mixed with a creeping anxiety, compelled her to pause just outside the door. What she saw made her heart seize in her chest. Inside, Omar sat at his desk, his posture straightened and attentive, while Lara stood close beside him, guiding him through another practice run. At first glance, it appeared similar to previous coaching sessions, but the difference was subtle yet undeniable. Lara's hands were near his shoulders, adjusting his stance, and she leaned in slightly as she whispered instructions. Omar's eyes were focused entirely on her, his lips curved into a small, relaxed smile that Mina hadn't seen directed at her in years. The warmth in his expression, the way his body seemed to relax under Lara's guidance, was intimate. It was no longer just a lesson in public speaking or confidence. It was a connection charged with emotional resonance. Mina felt a whirlwind of emotions: shock, hurt, confusion, and a gnawing sense of betrayal. Her mind raced to reconcile what she was seeing with the explanations Omar had offered. Was this truly just coaching? Or had the line between professional mentorship and personal intimacy already been crossed? She watched as Lara touched his hand to demonstrate breathing techniques. And Omar's reaction was subtle but unmistakable, a small shiver, a deepening attentiveness. A vulnerability he had rarely displayed with Mina herself. For a moment, Mina questioned herself. Was she imagining the intensity, overanalyzing a professional interaction? But the laughter they shared, quiet and soft, the way Omar hung on her words, and the unguarded openness of his body language left no room for doubt. This was different. This was beyond what she had expected, and it cut deep not because of physical betrayal, but because Omar seemed to enjoy Lara's presence in a way he no longer shared with her. Mina's chest tightened as she stepped back silently, retreating down the hallway. She wanted to confront them immediately, but a mix of fear, confusion, and disbelief held her in place. The images of their closeness replayed in her mind over and over as she sat in her bedroom later that night, trying to make sense of it. The reality was unavoidable. Lara had become a catalyst for a connection between Omar and someone else. Emotional, if not yet physical, that Mina had neither invited nor understood. By the end of the night, Mina knew her perception of her marriage had shifted irrevocably. The discovery had removed the veil of uncertainty. What remained was a new reality she could no longer ignore. She realized that to confront this truth, she would need clarity, courage, and a reckoning with both Omar and Lara. The question that haunted her was no longer whether something was happening, but why her husband responded so openly and warmly to another woman in ways he no longer responded to her. The discovery of Omar's closeness with Lara had left Mina restless for days. Every glance, every movement of her husband seemed magnified under the lens of suspicion and hurt. She wrestled with a mixture of emotions, anger, betrayal, sadness, and confusion. She had always believed that her marriage was strong enough to withstand external pressures. Yet here she was, faced with evidence that Omar had formed a connection with someone else that she could not ignore. That evening, Mina made a decision. She would confront Omar directly. The confrontation began subtly. Mina waited until Omar returned from work, his demeanor unusually cheerful and confident. She asked him to sit with her in the living room, her voice calm but edged with tension. She avoided accusations at first, speaking carefully, describing what she had seen during the last coaching session. She explained step by step, without exaggeration, the details of Lara's presence, her proximity, and the intensity of Omar's responses. As she spoke, Omar's expression shifted, first surprise, then defensiveness, and finally a complex mixture of guilt and vulnerability. Omar's initial response was denial, insisting that nothing inappropriate had happened and that Lara was simply helping him with the presentation. But Mina pressed gently, recounting his relaxed expressions, the smiles, and the attentiveness he had shown, elements that went beyond mere professional mentorship. At that point, Omar's composure faltered. He looked down, his voice lowering, and admitted something he had not yet shared. Lara had helped him feel seen in ways he had not felt in years. He explained that he had been struggling with feelings of inadequacy, the stress of work, and a growing emotional distance in their marriage. Lara's guidance had not started with desire or flirtation. It had started with understanding and support. But over time, he realized that he felt alive again, emotionally engaged and confident, qualities he had lost touch with, and qualities he subconsciously craved from Mina. He confessed that he hadn't realized how much he needed validation and presence, and that Lara's coaching had unintentionally provided what he had been missing. Mina listened, her heart heavy yet conflicted. The anger that had been simmering began to mix with empathy. She understood now that Omar's reaction was not necessarily a betrayal rooted in lust or malice, but a response to emotional neglect that had silently grown over the years. Yet, the reality remained painful. Her husband's enjoyment of another woman's guidance, his vulnerability with someone else, cut deeply. The confrontation ended not with resolution, but with raw honesty. Mina demanded clarity about boundaries moving forward, while Omar promised transparency and a commitment to rebuilding the emotional connection that had been lost. Both realized that the confrontation was a turning point, an acknowledgement that their marriage had problems needing urgent attention. The session left Mina exhausted but enlightened. She had seen the extent of Omar's emotional needs, the gaps in their relationship, and the unintended consequences of neglect. By the end of the evening, the air between them was thick with tension, reflection, and unspoken questions. While confrontation had exposed vulnerabilities, it also opened the door to understanding and opportunity to confront their marriage's fractures before they deepened. Mina realized that moving forward would require courage, patience, and a willingness to face truths both uncomfortable and transformative. After the confrontation with Omar, Mina felt emotionally drained. The hours of sleepless reflection had left her questioning everything about her marriage, the past years, the distance that had quietly grown between them, and the way Omar had responded to Lara. Yet, a part of her still needed closure, a way to understand the woman who had become an unexpected presence in their lives. Determined to find answers, Mina arranged to meet Lara privately under the guise of discussing professional boundaries. What followed would completely alter her perspective. When Lara arrived, she was calm, poised, and aware of the tension that hung in the air. Mina began cautiously, describing what she had witnessed, the feelings of hurt and betrayal, and the concerns that had been gnawing at her. Lara listened without interruption, nodding thoughtfully. Then, in a measured voice, she began to reveal the truth and explanation that stunned Mina to her core. Lara had never intended to seduce Omar. Her purpose had been purely supportive, professional, and empathetic. She explained that when Omar first confided in her about his insecurities, his anxiety about the presentation, and his emotional distance from Mina, she had offered guidance as a friend and mentor. The hands-on techniques, the whispers of encouragement, and even the closeness that Mina had misinterpreted were all part of methods designed to restore confidence and emotional clarity, not to create intimacy for her own gain. Lara's intent was to help Omar reconnect with himself so he could return to his marriage as a more present, self-assured partner. As Mina absorbed this revelation, a swirl of conflicting emotions overwhelmed her. Relief came first. Lara's motives were not malicious. Yet, there was also a lingering ache, a recognition that the emotional bond Omar had formed with Lara highlighted the very gap in their marriage that Mina had overlooked. Lara's presence had inadvertently revealed what Omar had been craving all along: attention, validation, and a sense of being fully seen. It wasn't Lara who had caused this gap. It was the neglect and distance that had grown quietly over the years. Lara encouraged Mina to see the situation as an opportunity rather than a catastrophe. She emphasized that awareness was the first step toward change, that Omar's responsiveness was a signal of what their relationship could become if nurtured intentionally. For the first time in weeks, Mina felt a spark of clarity. She realized that while the circumstances had been alarming, the situation also offered a path to reconnection, a chance to rebuild trust, intimacy, and emotional engagement with her husband. By the end of the conversation, Mina had a new understanding. Lara's actions had not been a betrayal but a catalyst, forcing Mina to confront uncomfortable truths about herself, Omar, and their marriage. The shocking truth was not about infidelity but about awareness, the unseen